If you're the kind of person who likes to take pictures of slides, these first two are the ones you should take pictures of. If you want to hear more about this topic than I'll get to tonight, or if you just want to leave now and have it delivered in a more convenient way, I was one of the people interviewed for the Kansas 1972 podcast episode that was about the Walnut Valley Festival. And there's a nearly 30-minute interview that I did with Kay at Kansas Public Radio that you can find online. And coming soon, I got interviewed for the Wichita Public Library podcast with Sarah and Daniel, and you can check that out too. The book is also available in most Kansas libraries now because it was a Kansas notable book, and so you can find it there too. We are talking this evening about a few facets of the Walnut Valley Festival that this book is about. We're going to touch on several things and not follow any of them too deeply. And I'm hoping to leave some time before our night is over to hear your questions if you have them, but especially your stories. How many of you have experienced Walnut Valley Festival? So we've got about 2/3 of the room that has stories and 1/3 of the room that needs to learn what we'll probably say a couple times tonight. Every year is the best year to come. Mm-hmm. So this is, I hope, some perspective in how the festival happened and why, at least in my interpretation, it has stayed. But it's also a little bit of a love letter to something that's important to me and to my family. And I've got to remember that this clock is the accurate one and not that clock.
Yeah, sorry, it's been, yeah. I
was a little freaked out as we were in our song circle. I was like, do we still have 20 minutes to kill this? So we're all right. I'm ready to turn it off.
Okay, so try now.
There we go. This quote from a Tom Chapin song also speaks to me very much. You know, I'm not traditional and I've never claimed to be, but I come from a tradition that others made for me. They're still alive inside my heart, although they're now long gone. I like to think they trusted me to pass the music on. The Walnut Valley Festival, because it is a 50-year-old event, and because it is significantly an event that attracts similar people coming back year after year, has very much a generational quality to it. And so I'm pleased that I got entrusted to share some of that music in written form, as well as being a participant along the way. So this book that we're talking about has 4 chapters and all of the image headers written by me, and I created kind of the connective tissue. But it also has contributors that include some of the early influencers on what became the Walnut Valley Festival, a number of people who have been enthusiastic participants and staff members along the way, and a number of people who've been performers. There's no way to capture a 50-year-old event and get everybody's perspective, but I tried to create space for other people to tell their part of the story in their words and get less in the way of what they might have to say. So how I got to this topic, this is 1991, and that person, if it's not somebody you recognize, is Tom Chapin. I grew up in a military family, so moved all over. And one of the constants in our family was at least Dad getting out his guitar and often finding the people in the area to play with. That was part of creating the social network in the new places that we lived. So even though I also like super obnoxious, loud rock and roll music, I very much grew up in a folky family. And Harry Chapin, the older brother to Tom Chapin, if you don't know those musicians, was one of those staples and maybe one of the first artists that I dug into more on my own than I heard around the house. So I moved to Winfield in 1989 to attend Southwestern College. and was kind of aware of the Walnut Valley Festival because I had some people near where I went to high school with in Colorado who came every year as vendors and said, look for us when we get out there. And they would play on the street and I would sometimes stop in and sing along. So I knew a little bit about that. And I came to Winfield and saw, I think it was actually a flyer on the table at the bank where I was opening my bank account that said Tom Chapin was playing at this Walnut Valley Festival that I heard of. And I said, I got to go see Tom Chapin. So I did. I went for one day of the festival. I assumed it would be the kind of thing you just sort of wandered into. It was not. I assumed it would be just a few dollars. It was not. And I thought, I'm here anyway. I've been waiting in a car for 20 minutes. I guess I'm going to go. And it was amazing. So I not only saw Tom Chapin, I discovered several other new musicians. I found some people I didn't know I knew, but I did know, and was immediately hooked. And so starting the next year was a 4-year and then 4-day and then eventually 10-day participant. And Southwestern College and the Walnut Valley Festival have a long connected association. We'll touch on a tiny bit of that, but that included that Tom Chapin came back and did a concert at Southwestern while I was a student, and I got to be one of the roadies. I got to carry in Tom's banjo. So I was in love with the music and that connection to the music from the beginning. And then fairly early on in my time in Winfield, I met two people who were really important to the history of the Walnut Valley Festival. How many of you knew Stuart Mossman? All right, so that stories of Stuart could be the rest of the evening. I didn't know Stuart deeply or for a long time, but I knew him in a way that no one else ever did because I was taking a ceramics class. I had to have 3 hours of visual art. Ceramics was the only thing I thought I could pass. And Stuart, who was kind of semi-retired, was auditing the class. And so we would find ourselves in the ceramic shed together at 5:30 in the morning. And when Stuart found out that I knew about the folk musicians that he was friends with, he was full of stories. Most of them were probably true. And so I had a semester of at least weekly just one-on-one hearing about Stuart's life from Stuart, and it was amazing. Also, midway through my time at Southwestern College, I started dating Jennifer Murrett, who's in the back of the room. I think she will still admit that. And Jenny's dad was Joe Murrett. He was Joe Murrett. And Joe Murrett was also one of the founders of the Walnut Valley Festival. And wasn't somebody who talked about it like within the first 5 minutes the way Stuart was. So over time, the stories started coming up. So my folky interests led me to these gentlemen. So sidestep for a moment just to talk about my field of history. I went through the community and local history program at Wichita State, where I'm a staff member. And community and local history is a subset of a relatively modern way of studying history known as public history. And like a lot of things that I'm interested in, like positive psychology and like leadership coaching, it's a school of thought that goes back into the late 60s, early 70s. And it's the idea that the history that matters and shapes our communities is often not the history of the people with great titles. And so public history is the practice of really engaging people and answering questions about what's around them and what's their memory of what's around them, and recognizing that those stories matter too. So it's trained historians helping regular people tell and document and interpret their stories. And one of the things that we know about community and local history is that when there are important anniversaries coming up, often that means that the organizations and communities associated with them are ready to be studied. I had actually kicked the tires a few times over the years on the idea of some kind of festival history project and never really got a lot of traction. And then I started working on my thesis for my community and local history project. And my advisor helped me to choose this among some other topics. I was worried the Walnut Valley Festival would be academic enough to study. And the festival, knowing that we were at that point just a few years away from the 50th anniversary, was much more open than it had been in the past. And so I had the opportunity to dig in there. Some of you who are festival attendees might remember this phrase: it takes a year to recover from Winfield, and it takes Winfield to recover from the year. And if it's not clear from context, the Walnut Valley Festival is also colloquially known as Winfield, certainly by most of the people who come to it from out of Winfield, but actually in Winfield too. Sometimes we are talking about Winfield, which happens in Winfield. You'll also hear, as you get closer to the center, people refer to it as bluegrass or as just the festival, because while there are other festivals in Cowley County, there's really just the festival, and the other festivals have names. So people plan their years around the festival. One of the arguments I made in my thesis, and that you'll see in the book represented a little bit as well, is that the Walnut Valley Festival is absolutely representative of the festival culture that was emerging in the 1960s and 1970s.
I didn't understand that.
Yeah, we're still studying. So some of these things you may very well know. In the 1960s, there were a lot of folk festivals that either started or restarted. The 1920s and 30s, there were a lot of folk and folklore festivals. So that's really in some ways the beginning that we should point to. But Newport was particularly influential in part because some of the people who began the Walnut Valley Festival and its precursors were really changed by their experience at the Newport Festival. Also, the Mountain View Festival in Arkansas, which had a couple of different names. But both Newport and Mountain View had a little bit of a participatory and teaching element to them, not just stages of entertainers playing. And of course, the rock festivals were happening. Anybody here attend the Kansas Peace Festival near Pittsburgh?
69, 68.
Somewhere around there, yeah. Wow. Okay, we should talk. That might be one of my next projects.
I think I wasn't really there.
Yeah, so the Pittsburgh Peace Festival in my research is as close as Kansas got to a true Woodstock kind of experience, and it had a number of visits from law enforcement and became a little bit infamous.
I wonder why.
Yeah. So the first specifically only bluegrass festival that was documented happened in 1965. Bluegrass, we'll talk about it a little bit more, but it is a particular offshoot of music that kind of sits between country music and folk music. And by 1971, bluegrass festivals were enough of a thing that Playboy magazine did a feature on them. And by 1972, there was a Wall Street Journal article about how to make money putting on a bluegrass festival. And the first lesson was start with $10,000 and spend $5,000. Remember that. Some folk music festivals started popping up in Winfield associated with Southwestern College. Sam Onchus, who lives in Hutchinson, is a very fine banjo player, was the driving force behind the first one in 1968. It brought in some names that you may know. Jimmy Driftwood, Doc Watson, and Mance Linscomb were all there for that first 3-day festival. And a smaller version was repeated in 1971 that was both known as the Southwestern College Folk Festival and the Walnut Valley Folk Festival, which creates a little bit of confusion. Any origin story, there's going to be no total clear definition. Some people say the Walnut Valley Folk Festival at Southwestern College was the first Walnut Valley Festival. I disagree. I think there's a line between those. But if you interpret it differently, you can fight about it later.
Write your own book.
Right, yeah. In the time between the 1968 festival, which Stuart Mossman was a volunteer for, and the 1971 festival, the Mossman Guitar Company had really started being an actual business that had a business model. And so part of the festival experience was also finding other luthiers and other people who played the kind of guitar style that was most associated with Mossman guitars, as seen on this amazing T-shirt in the background. So the origin story of the Walnut Valley Festival, as near as I can tell, is in a couple of parts. So on the one part, Joe Merritt, who I mentioned before, and his good buddy Bob Redford were JCs, and the JCs had been for a few years operating some motorcycle races as a fundraiser. And the community was a little tired of the crowds that the motorcycle races drew. And Joe and Bob were a little tired of the work of putting on motorcycle races. So they were kind of thinking we ought to do something different. At the same time, Joe was a staff member at the Mossman Guitar Company, very part-time, because Joe was a farmer. He was a little older than some of the other guys at the guitar factory, but he was working for Mossman in exchange for a guitar. So if you put in enough months, you got to build your own guitar. And the Mossman guys were always going to these festivals to make contacts and to sell guitars, and coming back and telling Joe, you got to go to one of these festivals, at least come to Mountain View. It's 5 hours away. And Joe was always like, I kind of like it when the shop's quiet. I'm just going to stay here. And one time, being kind of a smartass, he said, well, if you put on a festival here, I'd go to that. And Stewart said, well, if I had $10,000, I could put on a pretty good festival. I mean, Wall Street Journal says so, right? So Joe is kind of carrying these stories back and forth, and he's telling Bob about all the exciting stuff that's happening at the guitar shop and how the company's growing, and that they're kind of half serious about maybe we should have our own festival. And Bob said, and Joe said, I'm a JC. I bet if I had Bob's help, I could find 10 people to each put up $1,000, and we could put on a festival. And he talked to Bob about it. And once Bob realized that he was kind of serious about it, Bob said, okay, if you can sell me on it, I'll put up the whole $10,000. So Stewart said we needed a festival. Bob said, I'll put up the money. Joe knew them both. And in March of 1972, they incorporated the Walnut Valley Association. And that next September, they put on the Walnut Valley Festival. Wow. Now, there were bunch of other people, volunteer and conscripted and likely paid, who were involved. But that was the moment that the organization was born. One of the things that I think is true that has kept the festival alive all these years is that it manages to be both absolutely family friendly and absolutely counterculture. There is a place for kids, there's a place for families, there's a place for expressions of faith. And that was very much part of, especially Bob and Joe's makeup. Neither of them were the kind of people who would have gone to your festival, I'm just saying. Stewart maybe. But it was also a little bit of what the community needed to hear, because, the community was a little tired of the rowdy motorcyclists. The community had read about what happened in Pittsburgh. Everybody had seen the Woodstock movie. Winfield was not interested in that. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, the festival was loose enough that you could embrace the counterculture. You could, act up a little bit. You could pretend you were at some other festival. And as people got older and started coming back, they knew that for a few days they could let go of some of the rules and constrictions of the rest of their lives. And it was permeable. You didn't have to be one or the other. You still don't. You can spend a little countercultural time and a little family-friendly time. Even though I think the Walnut Valley Festival is representative of the time, I also think there are some things that have made it unique and have contributed to it staying around. One of them is Bob Redford, who died a few years ago. Joe and Stewart and Bob were originally all equal investors. Within just a few years, Stewart was bought out of the organization, so he continued to consult, but he was not a staff member. And Joe, who had a great loyalty to Stewart, said, buy me out at the same time. I'll still keep working. I'll still keep running my crew. But if Stewart's not going to have a stake in it, I'm not either. So that Bob Redford and the Redford family from that time around 1976 have assumed all the risk and whatever reward has come from owning the organization and have kept it in-house and in the family. So that's very unusual. Also, when other ideas popped up, they tried them and they didn't stick with them. The one interpretation is they had a series of failures. There are other ways of telling these stories, but they learned the hard lesson a few times that what we're really good at is putting on this festival and this set of contests, and they kept doing that. They never picked up any corporate sponsors, and unlike some other festivals that have gone on for about the same amount of time, they have had no interrupted years until the year of COVID. They have had no ownership changes. They have had no venue changes. It's been the same company in the same place every year.
And the summer one, was it only 1 year?
Yes, there was one June Jamboree.
I was at that Jamboree and I never knew that they had another one. So
Yeah.
I wondered.
There was one spring thing, and then there was one 2-day set of concerts that they did in Kansas City. They also, oh, please.
The spring thing had a vinyl album.
Yes, you can still find that album. They also investigated for a little while co-running either a festival or a bluegrass club in Japan. The Japanese investors were very enthusiastic. It was very complicated. And it was internally one of the things that some of the organizers disagreed about. Like, should we be in Japan? That doesn't feel like what we're doing in Winfield. For those of you who haven't been there, camping is a big part of the festival experience and the festival culture. Initially, it was just free. Over time, it's become, in some ways, its own revenue source in order to keep the grounds ready for campers. So it's not a huge money maker, I don't think. I'm only so much of an insider, but I get the impression that what we pay for camping pretty much allows us to be able to be camping. Having separate stickers for the two campgrounds, the West, not Walnut, and Pecan, started happening in the early 80s. That was actually Jenny's dad's suggestion. Also, I found in my research the notes, Jenny's mom was the first person who suggested festival wristbands. I don't know if they were common at other festivals, so I'm not going to keep researching. As far as I'm concerned, my mother-in-law invented wristbands as admission tickets in all events.
Okay, let's get.
So for those of you who aren't sure about the sound, here's a couple of minutes of one of the earliest officially, specifically bluegrass bands. This is a band that was led by Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs. Lester Flatt did play the Walnut Valley Festival. Earl Scruggs never did.
And try and get this so that the people on Zoom can see it too. Oh, got too many windows open. Let me see. This one. Okay. If I just if I drag this one over here, this is the one, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then I go back to Zoom and share. I think that'll do it. Okay. Yeah, I think that does it. All right, here we
All
go.
right. So this is the sound of early, very influential bluegrass.
T. Thomas basically wanted us to do the Salty Dog Blues for him. look here, it sound like you, I'm not stopping to watch you. I love you. Let me.
I don't know who's playing Dover in the band. Or I would know.
Well, that would be his honest face before everybody.
I saw them
Deep down his face.
early 1970s at the Smoky Green Bluegrass Festival near Albany, New York.
Oh, wow. Jealous of that. So you'll notice if you're not somebody who spends a lot of time around bluegrass, equal parts verses and instrumentals. And the instruments that you heard were banjo, fiddle, dobro, and banjo again, because that was Earl Scruggs, who kind of defined bluegrass banjo in a lot of ways. Notice you did not hear guitar as a solo, and Lester was playing with finger picks. With what? Finger picks. So something fun to play with sometime, go to the Google Music timeline. You can see when folk and bluegrass kind of had a boom. So in the 1960s and the early 70s, even a lot of pop music had some of the sounds that we associate with bluegrass in it. So this is the other sound clip that I want to play for you, because the Walnut Valley Festival, we talk about it as the festival, but it really in the beginning, the biggest focus was an instrument contest, the National Flat Picking Contest, because Mossman guitars were particularly set up for a new style of guitar playing that was starting to show up in bluegrass so that guitar players could play guitar solos too. And Doc Watson wasn't so much in bluegrass bands, but in a lot of ways is the person who defines the guitar style that we think of as flat picking. So we'll invest 3 minutes in this.
I heard fiddle tunes and tried to fiddle for 18 months, I guess, and I wasn't much better than a hungry pig on the thing. So I decided I'm gonna learn some fiddle tunes on the guitar, and I figured out that if you begin to pick up and down, and even stroke, getting the notes coming up and down, you can get them a lot faster without working so hard. And the fiddle tunes, I learned one or two, didn't do much with it until I heard Grady Martin play guitar in Nashville on Sugarfoot Rag and Hank Garland and those boys, and I thought, hey, if they can play fiddle tunes that smooth, I believe I can learn one or two. So I worked at it.
Thank you very much. And now to stagger the variety a little bit, I'll do a little more flat picking on one of the old fiddle tunes. I don't know how much it got changed from its original form by Mr. Leslie Keys, but by the time it got to me, but I done my best to leave a little of the flavor in it. It goes like this.
So did he invent this technique? Is that what he was saying? Or
Nobody invented it, but Doc Watson brought it to many of us. I mean, if there's one finger, a flat picker that we all look to, it's Doc. All right, we're going to burn through a couple other things here. See if it'll let me advance.
oh yeah, sorry. Back for you here. Okay, it should work now.
So what grew into the Walnut Valley Association and Festival has room for any kind of acoustic music. You'll find it all, but the roots are in bluegrass and flat picking, and you don't have to work very hard to find those things. And as Chris Jones, if any of you are Sirius XM people, Chris is one of the hosts on Bluegrass Junction. Chris says an acoustic music or bluegrass festival brings together people with a common musical interest. They are often very participatory events in which audience members also play music together. The Walnut Valley Festival has been front and center of growing this way of doing festivals and has always emphasized the people in the contests and the people in the campgrounds and this idea of growing musicians and passing the music on. And even the booking of stage acts has often privileged the people who are the best players over the people who are the most famous players. Few festival celebrities. In the upper right, probably the one that in this room as I look around, the fewest of you will recognize is Casey Musgraves, who's taken home a ton of Grammys and had several #1 albums in the last few years. You'll also see the Chicks, originally the Dixie Chicks, who there's a little fuzziness between here and a place in Texas, but may very well have played their first ever paid show at the Walnut Valley Festival. Certainly we were one of the people who broke them. Alison Krauss, who has in the top 3 most Grammy winners of all time and won the fiddle contest in Winfield when she was 13. Billy Strings, who's the biggest name in bluegrass right now. On the right, Chris Feely from Nickel Creek was also part of hosting Prairie Home Companion and its successor program when it lasted. Mark O'Connor, and then Doc Watson, Tom Chapin, we talked about, and John McCutcheon, who's very much a part of the spirit of the Walnut Valley Festival. A few significant transitions. Even though the Walnut Valley Festival is not strictly a bluegrass festival, it was recognized by the International Bluegrass Music Association as its event of the year. We lost Stewart that same year. About 10 years later, a documentary about Stewart came out, and it's one that I recommend you seeking out. Few years after that, Bob Hamrick put out a beautiful coffee table book that really captures and images the Walnut Valley experience.
Talked about the documentary on Stewart.
Yes.
When that came out, they had a gathering of all the Mosman people and builders at the community center after they showed the movie.
Yeah, it was.
They had a big jam session.
It's very cool to have all those folks in one place. We lost Bob in 2016, and Bob's son Bart was named executive director after that and has continued keeping the festival in the family even through this year, losing Bob's wife, Kendra. If you are interested in the full thesis, so the book is much more approachable, has other people's voices, has pictures, won an award. The thesis isn't any of those things. But if you really want to dig into the nitty gritty, it is also free. And it is right now the most downloaded thesis in the Wichita State electronic thesis collection. I've had 300 downloads of my thesis in the last 6 months. Most people, if you get your parent to read a thesis,
Right.
you're doing really well. So I'll go back to this. Let me see if there are any slides. Oh, so as we said, every year is the best year to come. And all of us who go to Winfield know to say together, I can't, I'm going to Winfield. So I want to hear your stories and questions for our last 10 or 15 minutes we have together. Thank you very much for being part of this and celebrating this event. Please.
My sister, who is a retired school teacher, had never even heard of Winfield, and she wanted to come and see it. So we went down last year. We paid what, $50 every person for the day. We get in there, she gets sick, and we have to come home.
Oh,
I made him take me this year.
good. I feel like the universe owes you that.
That's right. And it's the only place that I might be willing to camp.
Wow. Other stories or questions?
You know, Mike Cross is still performing, or
Mike's health is very poor, so I hope he'll be back to it, but right now he's not. He does from time to time post an update on his website.
My children were born in 83 and 87. So I started taking them their first years. And now my son has a 5-year-old and they take her. So it's really cool to see that generational effect.
Yeah, I think every year the festival photographers come back with hundreds of cute kid pictures because there are just lots of cute kids in a place where the kids are really happy.
Our middle son, Justin, was born September 11th of 1987. And we were at Winfield 3 days later, camping with a 3 or 4 year old.
Oh.
And so they've been lots of times. They were down this year and we were sitting there at stage 2 and we said, so my wife, Justin, what do you remember the most about the festival? And we looked back on stage 2 and he said, rolling down that hill.
Yeah.
I was, Paul, I used to work for a Times Sentinel newspaper in Cheney, and my editor, Paul Rhodes, goes every year and camps, and it's a big deal to him. And I think he does there's like a whole like lineup thing where you like go and park your RV and leave it in the line for, is this like a tradition that's developed around the whole?
Yeah, so this is actually one of the areas where I'm not such an expert because I live just a few miles from Winfield. We let all of that stuff happen. And then once the campground's open and people are done being grumpy, we go find our spot. But
Since you live down there, do you mind sharing your address with me?
come take a shower anytime. But yes, for those of you who haven't been part of it, for people who are really serious about being as early into the campground as possible to make their selections, there's a pre-lineup process. And then there's a lineup process, and then there's the actual day that the fairground opens. And when I first was coming, it was less organized. I will let you decide how organized it is any given year, but it involved sometimes having campers down the highway for a mile. And it was really disconcerting to drive by if you were not expecting that. Please.
I do remember going to the festival when I first moved to Kansas. I think 79. My in-laws took us to Winfield, the first one. And I remember when we went through, they checked all the coolers.
Yeah.
Yes. So that safe versus countercultural thing has been interpreted different ways over the years. So in the last couple of years, there's actually a beer garden inside the grounds, which some people thought was going to create a huge stir. Seems, from my point of view, to be going okay. But generally speaking, the unwritten rule has been no alcohol or illicit substances where the stages are, and we keep that for families. And in your own campground, you know, use your best discretion and keep everybody safe. And that has worked pretty well. There were some years early on when some of the festival staff decided they also really needed to police the fairgrounds, until I think ultimately they were convinced there's just no way to do that, and certainly no way to do that fairly. And I heard more than one story as I was collecting stories for the thesis and the book of people driving to the entrance and you know, being at the ticket spot and having beer in the back seat, and the person taking tickets saying, "Cover up your beer, you fool." So there may have been some of that going on too.
Do you have any photography by Todd Grady in your book?
Not in the book, because the book is all people who were officially working for the festival or under contract.
I know he worked for the Courier.
Yeah, I would love to get into some of the Courier archives, because Todd, well, I mean, Todd even just continues to take gorgeous pictures of the festival. Some of the earliest photos, I'm going to lose the name and be embarrassed later. But there were a couple of early years when the festival and Courier contracted, and so some people who were Courier photogs were also contributing to the festival archives. The picture, actually, and I should point this out so you have time to look at them. The pictures in the book, there are about 100 images. Almost all of them are from the festival collection, other than a couple. There's one picture I took, I'm very proud of. Most of them have never before been published. And also we have spread out here, for those of you who are interested, a bunch of pictures that were considered for the book. Most of what's here have not made it in, so also probably you've never seen. If you want to take a moment and look through those, please do. Last question or story?
Going back to the campsites, I know like there's the former Newton person that always goes early, and the Brigadoon is open. Is that their name for the campsite, or how's, I don't know how all that works.
Yeah, so there's a chapter in the book by Wayne Stedham that talks about what may have been the first campsite to name itself. But there are a number of campsites that establish names and identities. Brigadoon is one of the ones that's been around the longest. They're always kind of out near the horse barn. That creates a little bit of a predictable landscape in the campground. So even though everything's always a little bit different, and some new people are here and some people aren't, there are, I don't know, 30, 35 campsites that have names and visuals that you just kind of know, oh, it's going to be around there. And you can also give people instructions. So go over the hill, turn left at Lamp Camp, and you'll find it. Well, thank you all very much for spending some time. Again, there's no way to capture all this experience. This is just what it looks like through my eyes, but I really appreciate you sharing your stories and listening to mine.